Welcome to Talking Heads on USA Global TV, starring the one and only wonderful Dr. Jacqueline. It's a prestigious place where world-class influencers and experts meet, and where you'll find the most trusted advisors and coaches for all things in life and business. Visit usaglobaltv.com to sign up for our newsletter, get the value you need, and be first in line to learn about events and giveaways and other valuable content. Connect with us. Email Dr. Jacqueline at usaglobaltv.com to talk about how you can become part of USA Global TV. That's USA Global TV, where the doctor is always in.
Hello, I'm Caroline Heward, the Harley Street Stress Expert. Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio. Our show today is Talking Heads. I'm an expert presenter on today's topic, which is loss, dealing with loss, the grieving process. And this is part of the Mind and Body Connection series. Let's begin. I'm going to start unusually with a quote today, because grief is not an easy subject. So the quote is from Jamie Anderson. Grief, I've learned, is really just love. It's all about the love you want to give, but cannot. All of that unspent love gathers in the corners of your eyes, the lump in your throat, and in the hollow of your chest. Grief is just love with no place to go. That quote really touched my very soul, and I hope it touches yours. So grief and loss, it's not just about, and obviously the main reason for grief, the main thing we think about when we're thinking about grieving and the process of loss is somebody physically dying. But grief is actually many things. So loss can be a breakdown in a relationship. It can be the breakdown in a marriage. It can be infidelity within a marriage where you're still in the relationship, but actually there's been a breakdown in the emotional connection because of the infidelity. It can be an illness, or even a diagnosis of an illness, such as cancer. When somebody has the diagnosis of cancer, we can respond one of two ways: that we prepare all our affairs, get all our affairs in order to die, or we can say, right then, I'm going to live. I'm going to do everything that I didn't do, travel the world and do all the things, because money is no object now. I'm just going to spend it all. And I'm going to have a really good blowout. And so it does depend on how you decide to process that loss of the diagnosis, how you decide to incorporate that within your life. And sometimes when people do that blowout and have a good time and stop working and engage in all the things that they wanted to do, their life literally lasts longer. And that's really interesting in itself, because it's always about how we respond. It's also about if we have a diagnosis of infertility, for women especially, if they're looking to have a family and they have the diagnosis of infertility, or the man, then there is an absolute dichotomy of a loss of having a family, having a child, which is why there is so much in the way of investment, especially in relationships, both men and women that want a family, that they will spend a lot of money on IVF treatment and treatments to change that infertility diagnosis. And this is a loss of what could have been in terms of the family. There's a loss if we lose our right to live in the normal society. So if we are incarcerated, either with a mental health issue, in a hospital, or in prison for doing something wrong. And there are many people that are in that state of loss of their everyday rights to live in the normal way of society. So that is a loss of a lifestyle, a culture. So drug addiction, I know that this sounds like it's quite an anomaly, but when anybody is in a state of drug addiction, they have a loss of what their normal life would have been without it. And for many people, especially in a state of addiction, they will be in a state of looking for the next fix, to feel better, to live, to function. Now, this is not uncommon for people that have a drug addiction to live for the next fix because they don't feel life. And so they're taking drugs, whether it be recreational or pharmaceutical drugs, to feel normal. So they are having a loss of living a normal life. Loss of a home, a job. Many of us identify with our occupation, our right to be in work. And when that's taken away because of redundancies, or when a company goes bust, which has been very much in our changed times, that creates an identity crisis for many people. Loss of a home. When people are displaced, like countries, towns, cities, when you move into a different place, a different time zone, then there will be a challenge in terms of a loss, a grieving process of what was that is now no longer the possibility of life. So it is loss of the way that you live in your own environment and a loss of lifestyle and culture. So in our changed times, especially during 2020, 21, and for many countries still in 22, with the pandemic and the rising different variants, this has created many restrictions that are much, much deeper in terms of the way that we used to live. So a loss of a way that we could live that's been enforced upon us. And certainly in the towns, in London, there was a complete shutdown of stores, shops, restaurants, bars, and across the world this was the case. So many people lost their lifestyle, their going out, their way of living and being. They lost their way to go to work, which was, again, there was a huge sense of grief and loss, with people not knowing how to handle it or what to do with it, because it was commonplace. It was there for everyone. It wasn't individual. So there was a collective grieving process, certainly in 2020 and 21. And there are still restrictions in many countries today in 22. It also could be loss of an investment, loss of financial investment in terms of a partnership, a contract. It could be loss of, for some people, they kind of walk around and they say, no, I've lost my keys, I can't find my keys, or I've lost my glasses. And this is where, when you've lost certain things like that, where you can't find things, it is because there's something that's not being handled in terms of a grieving that you have not processed. And what I mean by that is it's about feelings and emotions that are unprocessed. when somebody calls and gives me a rundown of I've lost this, I've lost that, there's been a breakdown in my relationship, I've lost my home due to it being repossessed, I've lost a partnership, a business partnership, I've lost a business. I know at the back of that there is an unexpressed grieving process, and all these losses are because it comes up for them to handle, to deal with, so that they start to manage that unexpressed emotion and feeling to do with the grief. So according to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she identified 5 stages of grief. Now, she wrote a book called On Death and Dying, which was published in 1969, which was a very long time ago. But this book and her stages of grief was formed on the basis of her working with the terminally ill patients. And she identified, and this hasn't been authorized in terms of scientific research, but it is accepted as the grieving model. And she identified 5 processes around the grieving cycle. The first one being denial, the second one being anger, the third bargaining, the fourth depression, and the 5th acceptance. But in the years since this initial research, and bearing in mind that she was working with the terminally ill patients, she also realized that there was more to the grieving process, and so there was more added to this model. And so I'm now going to go through the 7 stages of grieving, which adds onto this initial research that was done by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. So there are 2 extra stages that have been identified that also Kubler-Ross also identified as well in her later research. So the first one is shock. And I'm looking now at somebody physically dying. And at the same time, a lot of these processes can also be completely identifiable with some of the things that we've gone through previously, some of the other types of loss. So bearing in mind that this is a loss and a grieving process of many different things and experiences. So the initial shock of hearing that somebody has passed away, so the initial hearing of the bad news, will create a complete shock to the system. And that shock will affect the root chakra. It will affect your foundations and your stability. It will affect the way that you show up, because your security, your foundations have been attacked by that shock. It will initially turn you into a space, for some people, of being paralyzed, not knowing what to do, just literally stopping in their tracks. Because the bad news is something that's incomprehensible. It's something that's challenging. It's something that's difficult, that you don't know how to handle. Certainly the loss of a parent is something that, even though loss, grief, somebody physically dying is a norm, it's an accepted thing that we don't last, we don't live forever. And yet, when it happens, it doesn't matter how old you are, there is still a level of shock. It's kind of like, well, how does this happen? And I believe that that shock is because that person has always been there. It's not uncommon to think that, unrealistically, that person will always be there, because they have always been there. And this will send your security, your stability, and your functionality into overdrive. And one of the next things that happens to people, for many people, is being in a state of denial. Like, no, this is not real. No, they're going to be okay. They're gonna wake up. They've just gone into a coma. There's all sorts of terrible thoughts that come round, that when you hear the news, that the immediacy almost after the shock is to deny that it's happened. It can't be possible. And this is the way that the mind and the body, that's how its coping mechanism of trying to handle what has actually happened. It's literally trying to avoid that the person has physically died. And yes, it is a shock to the system, because even though we know death is inevitable, we don't like to think about it. It's not where we start thinking. When we're born, we're not thinking about the day we die. We're actually living, we're experiencing life. So when we step into denial, it's because it moves us into checking into our own mortality, which is the pill that's really hard to swallow for many people. It starts to make you realize we're not here forever, and we have to face that inevitability. Next, anger steps in, a frustration of why now? Why have you done this? Why have you left me? Because it gets personal. How could you do this to me? And then the bottled up experiences of the emotions spill out. And it spills out into your everyday. Anger at all sorts of things. So you'll move around in your everyday life being angry about this and that and the other, and what she said and what he did, which has nothing to do with the external environment. The anger is coming from your internal world. The anger is coming from the solar plexus. And the solar plexus is about not feeling in control. And when you don't feel in control, the saboteur of the sacral chakra, the third chakra, the solar plexus, is anger, an unexpressed anger, which comes out in all sorts of frustrations. And when we get frustrated, that's the prerequisite to anger. And it won't be the other things and the other people. It will be the internal experience that we are experiencing inside that's spilling out into our everyday. So we'll be angry that somebody didn't do something. We'll be angry about the timing. We'll be angry about something not being there when it should be there. We'll be angry about being late for something. We'll be angry that somebody didn't do something. We'll be angry about all sorts of things. We'll be angry that, somebody, like something's not there in the supermarket when we go to shop. We'll be angry about all sorts of things. And the anger is the way that the body's mechanism of releasing the anger into other things without actually handling the unexpressed grief. Bargaining. This is where we're looking for a way out. We're trying to find our way through the Maya. We're looking at, what can I do instead of? What can I replace this person with? And so when we're in the bargaining stage, we might turn to work. We might fill our time so there isn't time to think, time to feel, time to express. So there isn't time to be in the experience of the grief. We will seek all sorts of ways of getting out of expressing the grief. It can be very, very moving when you watch somebody doing this, because when they're fighting for things and they're always in another direction, looking, doing, being busy, being occupied. But when they're in that space, there is no way out. Whatever they're seeking doesn't bring them the satisfaction or that fulfillment of moving through the grieving process. And yet it is part of the process. Being busy, moving yourself into not having time to deal with things. And then the depression, the realization, the finality of they've really gone. For some people, this can be almost immediate, a shutdown, not being able to cope, a shutdown of the feelings and emotions and an escape route to the mind. Because when you shut down the feelings and emotions, the escape is the mind, so that you don't have to cope, you don't have to feel, you don't have to think, you can be in your own world. This is where there's the final solution of the realization that the person has gone. Let me say that again. This is the realization that this person is no longer in your life. And how are you going to handle that? Are you still going to stay there? And for some people, the state of depression is prolonged because they don't find any coping mechanisms. They don't know where to go with it. And then the testing. This is one of the new extra stages of grief. Seeking solutions, looking for other ways of processing, looking for a way, a pass through the experience of the grief, looking for a process, an activity, and some way to handle that grieving process. At this time, rather than the bargaining, this is about looking, testing different activities, different experiences. It's your first sign of moving on, moving into another space within yourself and with others. And the final stage is acceptance, finding the way forward, your way. Your way is not everybody else's way. Your way is your way of moving forward. Now, I've gone through the 7 stages of grief almost like it looks like a linear experience for all. And it is not. The grieving process is completely personal to every single person. No one grieves in the same way. This looks as if it's one after the other after the other. In reality, it's not like that at all. You can be in different stages all at the same time. You could be in shock and in anger at the same time, as well as bargaining and depression. You can be accepting one day and in anger another day. So these are interchangeable. What we do know is that we do go through some stages of grief. And it's not just about the time that it happens. This can be prolonged. This can be over months, weeks for some, years for others. So there is no right way to grieve. There is only your way. There is no probable way you should grieve. There is only what feels right for you. And that's really important to understand, that there is no specific right way. Certainly in England, and I am English and British, there is this perception that we shouldn't cry at funerals, that we should have this British stiff upper lip and carry on and be normal. And so we move through that expression of grief in a different way, because it's not deemed as socially acceptable. In some cultures, it's very acceptable to grieve openly, to wail even. And it's important to understand that no one can tell you how you should grieve. No one. And if anybody does tell you how you should grieve, you can tell them to mind their own business, because your way is not their way. I have frequently given people permission to grieve in their way, because society and culture deem us that we can only grieve certain ways. And it shouldn't last too long either, because we have to get back on the horse. But this isn't right. It's not how it should be. And many times I've actually heard people apologize for crying. I've heard people apologize for saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't talk about it." But really, there is no apology required. Everybody is entitled to their way of handling their grief. Sometimes grief can move a person into an existential crisis where they will be challenged. They will start to look at everything in their life. They will become incredulized by their life. They will look back. They will ask questions. They will be looking for well, what does this mean then? So what do I do now with this? For sometimes it can create the crisis of, what is the meaning of life? What am I doing here? What's my purpose? Those critical life questions that many of us don't think about until something like this happens. And there are some people that actually handle their life through existential crises. When something happens, like a relationship breakdown, a marriage breakdown, a bereavement, a loss of a job, a loss of a role or a business, loss of a child, of a pet, a home, something that's meaningful. They go inside and they start to question everything. And that questioning, when they move into that questioning, this is what can create a phoenix stage, a rising through the ashes, a moving forward in an entirely different way, a questioning that leads to an unbelievable transformation. For some, even though it's their biggest challenge that they've ever had to face, it can lead to their greatest transformations. It can lead to their greatest potential being exposed. And it can lead to incredible rewards in life, both physically, emotionally, mentally, and behaviourally. Because when you touch an existential crisis, something can happen that is like magic. You question life without realizing it, and you realign your purpose. for who you are being and how you are showing up in the world. And certainly, I'm a product of many existential crises in my life. And I didn't realize that was a thing until that experience happened multiple times. And it is a way that we can transform in the most positive ways in our life for ourselves, our family, our community, and the wider world. It is when we hit this space of questioning, it is possible to find your meaning, your personal meaning for life, and your personal purpose for life. This doesn't happen for everyone. But when it does happen, I have seen, I have witnessed people literally 360-degree turn their lives inside out and upside down and change how they're showing up and living and being in the world. This isn't wrong and it isn't right. It's a way of some people moving through their grief and finding meaning, and finding resolution and purpose. And it can be very different when somebody physically dies as to what we do with that. Because we can be sure of one thing: we will die one day. I want to look at how we can overcome grief. And I've been touching on allowing feelings. It's okay not to be okay. Certainly, we are told that we should just get on the horse and get on with it. Just, what's the matter with you? That happened a month ago. You should be okay now. You've got to get on with things. And society pushes us through that process of what we should be doing and what we should feel and what we should think and how we should behave. There's a lot of shoulds there. But nobody should be doing anything apart from what feels right. If you need to take your space, then take your space. If you need to cry, allow yourself, give yourself the permission to express your emotion. For some people, talking really helps. And it really does for some people. Bereavement counselling is a way of putting it all into words. For some people, it doesn't help. Some people just want to not talk about it, to be talking about everything else or anything else. Because when they do talk about it, when somebody is questioning them, checking in to make sure they're okay, something unexpected happens. They move into choking back the feelings, not wanting to be looking like they're being vulnerable in public, in places that they don't feel comfortable. So there's no one way here. There's no quick fix. There's no right or wrong. There's just simply yours, your way. And I want to say here, it's your way or the highway. No one can tell you how to be. There will be reminders. Certainly in the first year of somebody's passing, there'll be their birthday. There will be the anniversaries, the birthdays, the day that they died. There will be the day that the funeral was. There will be many different reminders. The day that you scattered the ashes. The day that you heard that they had a diagnosis. There will be always reminders and anniversaries every year. And it's okay to be in that state of emotion at those times, because I'm giving you permission, because sometimes that's all we need. Permission to feel, to allow. It doesn't matter how long ago it was. It doesn't matter if it was 6 months ago or a year ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 22 years ago. It doesn't matter. The reminders and the anniversaries are to remind you and to give you comfort. They were in your life. Grief, you don't overcome grief. It transforms in your life. The grieving process moves through your life. It transforms with you and the way that you live through the grief. You never really get over somebody that has physically died, but you learn to cope, you learn to live with it, and you learn to move through your life. And you return back to your life in your way that's right for you, whether it's the same, whether it's more work, more deadlines, or whether it's the way that you completely change everything. Your relationships, your work, your reason for being, your reason for living. And I'd like to add that when things are difficult and we are challenged in this grieving process, that to move into a state of relaxation, meditation, breathing practices, moving from your head in the conversation of what you should and shouldn't be into your heart by breathing into your heart and out through your heart. By breathing slowly, purposefully, by breathing fully into the body and out through the mouth. That relaxation will move you into a state of being present, a state of being able to cope when you thought you couldn't cope. And it's a way of moving you into the present moment of the moment that you're in at that time. Grief is related to the heart chakra. The saboteur of the heart chakra is grief. And when the heart chakra closes down because we're not able to cope with that loss, whether it be a person, a lifestyle, a relationship, a job, a career, a loss of a home, a pet, it's still grief, it's still loss. And when the heart chakra closes down, the breath becomes laboured, the shoulders become heavy, the upper back may become painful. And more importantly, you will feel like you're fighting a battle every day. I have an invitation to you to feel comfortable in expressing your feelings and emotions, whatever they are, wherever you are, and to allow yourself the permission to be truly you. If you rearrange the letters Earth, it becomes heart. Now, Earth is the element of the root chakra, and the root chakra when there is a loss, will be affected. That's our foundation and our stability. And when you move into the heart, you move into a place of the saboteur of the heart chakra, which is grief. So let's rearrange the letters earth. It becomes heart. So even if someone we love is no longer on earth with us, we know that person will always, always be in our heart. That we can be sure of. They never leave our heart. Thank you for your attention and your interest. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is USA Global TV. You can find all our Talking Heads episodes under the playlist Talking Heads 2022. You can find my own playlist under Caroline Heward, the Chakra series, and now the Mind and Body Connection series, under my name, Caroline Heward. Please do reach out to me if I may be of service to you. Please contact me on nomorestress@live.co.uk or reach out and call me on +44 if you're international. If you're local, 07523 120 189. I offer a free consultation over Zoom or Skype or by call for 30 minutes. It will move you into a state of relaxation. This broadcast today has been more of a transmission, a healing process for you to have more understanding of how you can process your grief. It is not a teaching module. This has been a healing transmission. Please, if you are suffering with any type of grief, listen to this many times. This is also a meditation. I've delivered this as a transmission to help you in those times of challenge when you can't make sense of anything or anyone and you're lashing out or you go into that depression. I am here for you. Please reach out. I look forward to sharing more transmissions with you in the coming weeks. Please check out my other videos. They're always transmissions because I'm here in service to help you overcome your grief and move forward in your life to find your true being and your true authenticity of what feels right for you. Thank you. Namaste.